everybody, and welcome to So Saturdays. Today we are going to make a peasant dress for the holidays. Now I've seen that a lot of you like my peasant dress tutorial, so I'm going to show you how to make one with long sleeves and ruffles around the wrists and around the bottom. So what I'm going to use is actually my pattern, and you can purchase my pattern if you haven't already, and I will give you the link to where you can purchase this pattern from. I'm actually using the size 7/8 for my daughter because she just sprouted up overnight. And what I'm going to use for the fabric is this satin charmeuse, and it has like a zigzag pattern on it. So what I'm going to do for this is I want to follow the pattern on this fabric so that it's going in the direction that I want it to be in. And when you're working with this kind of fabric that has lines or diagonals or shapes or any kind of decoration on it, generally you would go along the grain of the fabric. But what you want to do is go, what I like to do at least, is go with my preference. And I just cut the fabric accordingly. I don't want, if you can see and just kind of see how you would like it to look on you is what I actually do. And because this is for my daughter, I just kind of played around with it and seen how I want it to go on her. So as you know, I always work on the wrong side of the fabric. So what I'm going to do right now is fold this in half. And I am going to cut this on the fold using my pattern that I have. And I'm going to use the same pattern to cut the sleeves. So I'm just going to set this aside. And as you all know, I'm still waiting on my table. So if he can get along and get to Home Depot and get that wood and make my table, I will have better direction and a better view of what I'm doing. So I'm just laying the fabric out right now. And I'm going to iron it so that when I cut it, everything is even. And you're actually going to cut two pieces the exact same for the front and the back. This is going to be a little bit different than what we normally do for a regular shirt, just because we're making a peasant dress. Both sides need to be the same so that when you put the sleeves on, they fit on properly. So I'm going to adjust just a little bit so you can see actually what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm back, and I'm hoping that you can actually see what I'm doing here. I'm going to take my pattern and I'm going to lay it down, and I have this pattern. It's made to cut on the fold, just so that you know that if you purchase my pattern, you would know that. If you have not purchased my pattern or are not going to purchase the pattern, actually in the peasant dress tutorial, and I'll put that link in the description, I show you how to actually make a peasant dress without purchasing my pattern. But you would just use a regular shirt and cut it in the A-line sort of frame, and which is, cutting more of a curved collar and maybe cutting diagonally instead of doing the curve like you would for a normal shirt. So you would take the shirt, fold it in half is what I normally do, or you could place it, whole on your fabric and just cut the whole fabric piece. But you would cut like in a diagonal and then come around here and then cut going out, just like you would when you're making an A. So that's pretty much how I made my peasant dress pattern. So what I'm going to do is just pin this down so that I can cut two pieces. And I measured, this is not a full length pattern, but what I did was I measured my daughter, and I want the dress to go down from her neck 27 inches down. So that's what I'm going to measure down when I get ready to cut this. And I'm cutting this lengthwise as opposed to widthwise, just so I can get better usage from my fabric. And pay attention if you're working with a fabric that is satin or that has I'm sorry, I lost myself for a minute there. Okay, yeah, that just lets you know everything is not scripted. This is live. I am filming live, people. But no, if you're working with satin fabric, my little tip for that is if your fabric is so slippery that you can't stabilize it, you want to put something in between or underneath so that when you're cutting and you're pinning, that it stays together. Because what I've learned also with working with satin and silk is that it tends to slide a lot, and I have got so many things that I've sewn that have been uneven just because it won't stabilize. But one trick you can use is like a paper bag or wrapping paper. Tissue paper is another thing that you can use. You could also use that in the sewing machine when sewing, which will help you to stabilize your satin or silk fabrics when they're going through the sewing machine. So like I said, I measured down 27 inches. So I'm going to start at the top of this here, and I'm going to measure this down. Actually, I'm going to measure it less than 27 just because I'm adding a double ruffle at the bottom. So what I'm actually going to measure this at is 24 inches. And I'm going to put a pin where that 24-inch mark is. And that's where I'm going to cut. Okay, so what I've actually done to make this easier for myself is I folded this in half so I can cut the front and the back at the same time, as you can see. Now what I'm going to do, because I already have pins in here, is just take my pins that are up on the edge here and just try to put it through the bottom side so it's just a little stabilized and I can cut the front and the back evenly. And this is just what makes things easier for me. It saves me a little bit of time cutting the front and the back at the same time. It's just something I like to do. It's something that I developed over time. And like I've always said in my other videos, find what works for you. Find what makes you comfortable. If going by the general rules is not comfortable for you, you're sewing and you know what works best for you. If the item that you're sewing comes out like it's supposed to, then who says you have to follow the rules? Okay, so I'm just going to pin a little bit right here as well. My little novice seamstress, my son and my daughter, were playing with my scissors, so I hope they're where they need to be. I'm just going to iron a little bit so that it just gives me a little bit more stabilization. And like I said, I measured down 24 just because I'm going to add a double ruffle at the end. Okay, so let's get cutting. I'm just going to cut around the pattern. Now this fabric that I'm working with does not have any stretch to it, so I'm just cutting out a little bit further out than what the pattern is, just to give me a little bit more seam allowance. And I always go with the notion that if it's too big, she'll grow into it before she shrinks, right? So I'd much rather have it just to be a little bit larger, where I can add like a felt or something like that to not make it look so big, than to have to just start all over and sew it again because it's too tight. That's just the theory that I use. So because this isn't a full length pattern, like I said, measure out how long you want it. And I'm actually going to cut all the way down to the end just because I'm going to use the rest of the fabric for the sleeves and for the ruffle. When I get to here, actually, I'm going to come around and cut the edge. Because I'm going to use this bottom layer for the ruffle. It's alright, I am with my back to the camera. I'm just cutting all the way across. We're not missing any techniques here. Just cut the edge off, as you can see. And see, this is the thing, I'm working with satin fabric. It's starting to fall off. Now if I had my table, hint hint, this wouldn't be happening. But because I don't, and it's a good thing that I pinned it because it's trying to come apart away. The back is trying to come away from the front. So because I pinned it, it's kind of staying together. So I can just take this and just lay it flat, make it even it up, so that I can finish cutting off this last little piece here. because I made my neck just a little curved, and I want to cut that off because these edges are straight from the warehouse. So I'm not going to use these edges anyway. So this is what we have. This is what it looks like, and I have two identical pieces cut. One for the front and one for the back. So we're just going to set this aside for now and take out our pins because we need this for our sleeve. Now, if you purchase this pattern from me, I do have a separate pattern for the sleeve as well as the bodice. Now, the pattern comes from 2T, I believe, up to size 10-12. So you get all those pieces when you purchase the pattern from me. And you just follow along with the tutorial my video tutorial here on. So what we're going to do now is cut the sleeve. And I'm going to set this aside. I'm going to use this bottom half to create our ruffle. And we'll get to that in the end. So now we need to make our sleeves. Just going to set that there. And I want to make long sleeves. So I measured the length of her from her shoulder all the way down to the bottom, and it measured about 15. Now because I'm adding a ruffle around, I'm only going to cut to about 12-13, just because I'm adding like a 2-inch ruffle to that, or 2 to 3 inch ruffle. So these are uneven, which goes to show you that I folded them unevenly. But I have the right sides still facing each other, and I'm going to fold this in half, and I'm going to iron it flat just so that I know it's even, and so I can measure and cut out for the sleeve. And the sleeve is pretty much the same size as the bodice. And you'll see what I'm talking about once you put it all together. If you watch my other peasant dress, peasant shirt video, you know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to do the same thing here. And this actually is perfect. It's the perfect size going widthwise. So I'm going to pin it down. And I do have two pieces folded together, so I will have both my sleeves cut at the same time.
No.
We're going to do just like we did with the dress and measure down how long we want this to be. And like I said, I want mine to be 12, even though she measured 13, because I'm adding a ruffle, I'm only going to make it 12 down.
Yeah, we're supposed to do
So I'm just going to mark where that 12 inches measures out with a pin. And that's where I'm going to start cutting. So what I'm actually going to do first is cut this here across. Okay, set that aside, and then you're just going to cut along the sleeve.
This is
And like I said, I like to cut just a little further out to give myself extra seam allowance.
Smells good. Oh, it smells.
Be careful not to cut your hand, because I've done that as well.
Can you help me clean the house? This way.
And just cut around the neck right, because when you put this together with the main part of the dress, you're going to want everything to be
Now we
even.
have to squeeze some out of the water.
Okay, so now that I have that measured out, I'm just going to take my pins out of here, and then we're going to start connecting. This is the simplest, easiest pattern that you can actually use. It can work for anything. Work for yourself, work for your dog, work for anybody with any type of style of fabric. And you can do so many things with a peasant dress and a peasant top. It's unreal. And I love using this pattern because it's one of the easiest, and I don't have so many separate pieces that I have to work with to get a really cute shirt or a really cute dress for her. Alright, so let's go ahead and start putting this together. I'm sorry, I'm a little lost today. So we're going to start putting this together really soon. So really quick, before we start sewing everything together, what I have here is actually 4 3-inch wide strips, and they are both 13 inches long. Now what I'm going to do is sew these two pieces together because they weren't long enough for me to use. So I have both sides, and this is just going to make one long strip. And what I have here is two separate 43-inch long strips. One is 2.5 inches and the other is 3 inches. And what these are going to be used for is the bottom ruffle of the dress. And I'll show you I'll show you how to ruffle, just in case you haven't watched my ruffle video. I will show you how to ruffle both of these. So let's get started sewing these pieces together. So let's get started first by doing the ruffle that's going to go around the sleeve. We're just going to do the house all day. Hello, I'm recording. Hello.
My bad.
So we're just going to start by doing a straight stitch across to put these together and make it one piece. And then I'll show you how to finish off these edges because they will fray. This thing's stabbing me. Sorry. Okay. As with anything, no matter what you're sewing, I always do a reinforced stitch or back stitching. I'm just doing a straight stitch across. So that's our first piece. And now we're going to go on to our second piece. Take your pins out as you go. And then do the same thing this side. And because I'm working with such a smaller piece of fabric, it's easier for me to stabilize it without using tissue paper. So now we have one long piece. And I'm just going to iron both of these flat, and then we're going to go ahead and finish off the edges. And like I said, we're working with the parts that we're putting on the sleeves first. So what I would normally do for my edges is use my rolled hammer foot. Because a lot of you may not have one, I'm not going to use that for this video. I'm going to show you how to finish off these edges without using a rolled hammer foot. Now you can either do one or two things here. You can just take it and just do a zigzag stitch and not have to worry about folding it over. But for the part that's going to be on the bottom, I'm actually going to iron this down and do a straight stitch here just to have that edge finish off. And you can zigzag it before you turn it over. That's your preference. I'm not going to for this particular project, just because I know what's going to happen once it's done. It's easier for me once she's worn it and once I've washed it to go ahead and see how the edges look. And you can actually, once you fold this over, do a zigzag. So let's do that just for this tutorial. And it's going to be cute either way, with the zigzag stitch, with the straight stitch. It's still going to be cute. You can actually double this over. So let's do that instead. So I'll show you what I'm talking about, just for those of you who may not know what I mean. So now that we have this ironed down once, we're going to take it and fold it over again. And then we're going to straight stitch this down. And this will help us with those frayed edges, because now what we're doing is hiding them in the fold. And once you start working with satin fabric, you'll find that it's a lot easier once you know what you're doing to work with it. I had such a difficult time in the beginning working with satin fabric that I just wanted to give up on it. But I kept on working, kept on finding ways to make things work for me. Then I learned about the tissue paper and everything else, and then it became easier for me to work with satin and silk fabrics. So do your research, you know, look up on it. Don't feel embarrassed if things aren't working out for you in the beginning, because they will eventually in the end. So I'm just going to do this one for you, and then I'm going to do the other one by myself, and we're going to start on the bottom ruffle of the dress before we start putting everything together. So I'm just going to take this in here. I'm going to take it on through and do a straight stitch all the way across. And we still go ahead and do a back stitch just to reinforce it so it's not coming loose after it's been worn and washed. So this is what we have. We have a nice finished edge. So let's go ahead and zigzag the top. And this will be the top that'll be connecting to the bottom of our sleeve. So I'm just going to put my sewing machine on my zigzag setting. And I'm still going to do a back stitch when I start zigzagging, even though all I'm doing is trying to finish off my edges. I'm just going to take this all the way through and just do a zigzag all the way across. Now that we're at the end, we're just going to go ahead and back stitch again. And so we're going to take our scissors, and if we see any of those frayed edges just hanging off, just go ahead and cut them, because they won't be a problem at this point because we've gone ahead and finished off that frayed edge. Make sure you don't cut the stitch that you just made as you do this. And I like to just cut off these really long hanging frayed edges, just because when I attach and sew together, it tends to get wound up here in the bottom bobbin, which causes a problem when I'm sewing. So I like to cut as much of these frayed edges off as possible so that they don't become a problem for me. Okay, and now if you can see there, you have a finished edge here with just a zigzag stitch, and you can make yours wider or shorter if you like. So for those of you who have not watched my ruffle video, I will show you how to make a ruffle with the sleeve. So what I do is I normally take this and I put this at 7 or 8. For satin, I'll probably put it at 8. And this is our tension. We want it at the tightest tension possible. But for my look, 8 is fine for me. My tightest tension is actually 9. So 8 is fine for this particular project. I like to put my width here on 1. So I'm just going to go ahead, and put that up to 1. And then I like my length to be either on 4.5 or 5. So I'm going to turn that up. And I'm going to try 4.5 and see what that looks like. If that doesn't give me enough of a ruffle, then I go ahead and boost it up to 5, and then I change my tension to 9. So let's see what we get when we start doing this. And I'm going to put this right side facing me. The wrong side is down when I push this through. And we're doing a straight stitch as we do this. So you would do the same thing and do a back stitch to secure it, and just let it go ahead and through and start ruffling. And I'm getting a pretty good ruffle, so I'm just going to leave it at the settings that it's on now and just keep going through. Now that I'm at the edge, I'm going to go ahead and back stitch and finish putting it through. Now what you want to remember is to change your settings back once you start putting it together, because you don't want everything ruffling up at the edges once you're sewing. So now that we have this part done, we're going to go ahead and do the other part for the other side of the sleeve. And we're pretty much going to do the same thing for the bottom ruffle. And now that we're done with this, and like I said, these are going to be used for the sleeves. Are they too long? Yes, they are. But you can always cut it and use the... Excuse me, I have a little bit of indigestion. You can always cut these when you're done and save the scrap pieces to make like a flower or something else, or if you just need a scrap piece of fabric to use to practice something on. You can always, I always save my scraps no matter what. So here we are with our bottom ruffles, and this looks like it is the 2.5-inch ruffle that I cut. Strip that I cut. And like I said, both these strips for the bottom of the dress are cut at 43 inches long. This one is 2.5 inches wide, and the other one is 3 inches wide. So I just ironed this out, and I'm going to do the same thing to these strips that I did with the sleeve ruffles. I'm going to fold this up. Actually, I'm just going to zigzag it because I'm using this for the ruffle on the outside. I'm just going to zigzag both sides, and then I'm going to go ahead and ruffle this up. So I just got done ruffling that other part. So I'm going to change my settings back, and I'm going to put this on a zigzag and put this all the way through, just like I did with the other part, and go all the way across. Remembering to back stitch, and then just letting it go through. And be careful, because sometimes with this fabric it tends to push down into the bottom bobbin, so make sure that it's not doing that, because that will be a whole nother problem if it gets stuck in the bottom bobbin. So I'm just going to go across, continuing to zigzag the long strip, and I'm going to turn it over to the other side and do the same thing, and I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom strip, and then we'll go ahead and ruffle it, and I'll show you how to do that again. So now that we have both edges finished on both of the strips, let's just go back over how we're going to ruffle them. We're pretty much going to take this, we are going to put our settings on the tightest tension. Like I said, 8 is high for me, and I'm going to take my length up to 4.5, and I'm going to take my width up to 1. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. 4.5 for my length and 1 for my width. I'm just going to put it through doing a straight stitch. I have the right side facing me. It's facing up. So I just reinforce, and we're just going to go through and let it ruffle itself. If it starts to curl up and turn towards you, just fold it down and keep letting it go through. We have one done, and let's go to our other strip and do the same thing. And I'm kind of trying to see which way my zigzags are turned, so that once I put this on the dress, they're kind of going the same way. And okay, so let's just go ahead and put this one through, doing the same thing. Back stitch. Let it go. It got a little stuck there. Don't know why. Okay, so just push that through. Okay, so we're done with that. So let's start slowly putting the stuff together. We're going to start putting the sleeves, attaching the sleeves to the bodice of the dress. And let's start with one side, and because I still have mine folded, we're just going to go ahead and iron this out. Push this back a little bit so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. So now what I'm going to do, I'm at the bottom of our sleeve here, right? So I'm just going to take the ruffle, and I'm going to do it like I would do anything else that I'm putting together. I'm going to have right sides facing each other. As you can see here, both of our right sides are facing. So what you should be looking at is the wrong side. And you're just going to attach that ruffle to the bottom part of the sleeve. And you're going to do a straight stitch across when you sew it. So what I like to do is kind of lay it down so that we have a good amount of the ruffle going. Just because it likes to bunch up, I like to lay it flat so that I can see just a little bit better what I'm doing. And we're just pinning this at this point. And my like I said, we're just going to do a straight stitch across. We have more ruffle than we actually need. So before we sew this on, we're going to cut that part off. So what I like to do is kind of match it up and just look how it is. And if the ruffle is hanging over just a little bit more, that's fine. Okay. So now what you're going to do is just sew a straight stitch across. Now that we have the ruffle on the bottom part of our sleeve, it should look like this. And like I said, I just went ahead and I sewed a straight stitch across with right sides facing, and then once I was done, I just pulled it down, and now you can see that the ruffle is actually on the right side. If you need to iron yours down, go ahead and iron yours down. So I'm going to set these aside right now, and I know you may be thinking, oh my god, those sleeves look huge. Well, they do. You can always shorten these, or you could put elastic in like I'm going to do at the end. So now that we have that done, we're going to do the same thing to the bottom of our dress. And right now I have the right side facing me, just like I did before. I'm going to iron this flap at the bottom, and then I'm going to take my ruffle and I'm going to pin it down just like I pinned down for the sleeve. I'm going to do the same thing and sew a straight stitch across with both sides, so we have the ruffle on both sides. If you want to wait until you're done to put your ruffle on, that's fine. So this is just our first layer of the ruffle. Let me make sure I have the right size. I'm sorry. Okay, because I want the 3-inch piece to go down first, and then I'm going to put my 2.5-inch piece on top of that. So we're just going to pin this and do a straight stitch, and then I'm going to go ahead and show you how to put on the second layer of the ruffle. We now have the first ruffle stitched down on both sides, and what you don't know is I made a mistake. I didn't have enough of the initial ruffle that I made, so I went back, I looked, and thankfully I still had enough fabric to cut more strips. So I actually had to sew 2 pieces together to make one long strip so that I can make more ruffle. So this may happen during the process. Don't get discouraged. Just make sure that you're cutting your fabric right. Like I showed you in the beginning when I said I like to cut down when I'm cutting my pattern piece out. I like to cut the rest of the fabric off, because I know sometimes there will be a situation where I may make a mistake and I may need to use the remainder of the fabric like I did. So I was able to make more strips and get more ruffle done. So now what I'm doing is I'm just doing a straight stitch across to get my ruffle down, my first ruffle down. And I'm attaching this ruffle just like I did with the sleeve. And we're going to attach the second ruffle just a little bit differently. So what we have here is the same, just like the sleeve. You have that ruffle down, so I'm going to do the same thing to the other piece, and then I'll attach the second ruffle to this. Now that we have our first ruffle on, let's go ahead and start putting our second ruffle on. So what we're going to do with this one is just place it on top. We're not going to have it on the wrong side. We're going to have it on the right side. And we're just going to pin it down right on top of our first ruffle, if you can see that. I'm just going to do this to the front, and I'm going to do this to the back as well. And you can position yours however you want. I just want mine to be a little bit over the top of my first ruffle. And pretty much this is how you would put ruffles on if you're doing like a double ruffle on anything, a dress, a skirt, pants. This is how I do it. Like I've always said, you find your own way, you find what works best for you, and then go with that technique. This is how I like to do my ruffles, I like to put them on actually before I assemble the entire thing. I just find that it's easier for me. Her body, legs, arms fits better when I do it this way, as opposed to waiting until I'm done then putting the ruffle on. It just seems to be tighter, and she just seems to have a harder time getting through when I put the ruffle on after everything's already been stitched together. Okay, so I'm just going to stick this through my sewing machine, doing a straight stitch across. And the right side is facing up. It's facing me. I'm looking at the right side right now, and you should be too. So of course I'm going to back stitch to reinforce it so it's not unraveling once we get it all together. And just try to get this fabric going through as straight as possible. If you have any complications or you're having difficulties assembling this peasant dress, just let me know. I will answer your questions as fast as I can. And like I've always said, if there's anything you want to see me make, any technique you want me to show you, please ask. If I don't get to it right away, I will get to it as soon as possible. So before I go ahead and cut off those edge pieces and everything, just to clean it up, this is what it looks like right now. So you have 2 layers of ruffle here. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other side, and then we will be ready to attach the sleeves. So we have our 2 pieces here, all done with both ruffles. And here's our other piece. And that has both ruffles, and it's looking so cute already before we even attach the sleeves and finish this off. So now, let's start attaching our sleeves. So what we want to do when doing that, we're going to take one side, and this can be a little tricky, but the sleeve is going to be wrong side facing you. You're going to attach one side to the back. If you can see, we're attaching one side to the back. And I have the wrong side facing me, and actually wrong sides are facing, right sides are facing each other with the dress and the sleeve. And we're just going to attach the sleeves first before we do anything else. So I'm trying to get this as even as possible. And when you're doing this, you can do a zigzag stitch and go back over it with a straight stitch, which is really what I like to do with sleeves, just to make them a little bit more secure, especially when doing a peasant dress or a peasant top. So now we're just going to take this through, and like I said, you can do a zigzag stitch. And remember, when you're working with a curve, you want to make sure you are turning your fabric along with that curve. So I'm going to place my foot down and put this on zigzag, and then we're going to go back over it with a straight stitch. So we're still going to reinforce. So what you have here is a little thread from when we just went across. You're just going to snip that in the middle. And as you can see, it's separated. So now that I have this attached, I'm just going to go back over this with a straight stitch. I'm going to look at both sides and make sure that both sides are attached before I do that. Go ahead and put my fabric through, just like last time, and start with our straight stitch. Sometimes I stitch directly on top, sometimes I stitch. Okay, so this is the finished product, and Miss Autumn is wearing it, and it's the perfect length. As you can see here, we have the sleeves. and it's a little longer than 3/4. It's not completely a long sleeve, and I just have some threads that I have to cut off there. And for the collar, what I did was I folded this down and then I put the elastic through here. I don't know what happened to the rest of my video, but it didn't record the end of me putting the dress together completely, but this is what it looks like. And as I stated before, you can use any type of fabric to make a peasant dress. If you want to purchase my pattern, I will put the link in the description of this video. If you have any questions, please ask me. You can always reach me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And as always, see you next Sew Saturday.